This is the Inclusivity EQ podcast with Saul Gomez, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant people on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on their road to success, and get exclusive access on how to implement their success into your life and business. The Inclusivity EQ podcast is brought to you by the Strategic Advisor Board and your host, Saul Gomez.
Hey, are you looking to scale your business from 5 figures to 6 figures or 6 figures to 7 figures? If you are, I have the perfect thing for you. What I want you to do today is I want you to go download a book. This book is going to take you through my 3-pillar system. It's 100% free. All you have to do is go to growfast.cash. I say again, go to growfast.cash, and you're going to be able to download my free international best-selling book, which is called Be Good, Be Brief, Be Gone. You can take that book. It's going to help you scale your business to the next level. Again, go download it. Be good, be brief, be gone. Growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Inclusivity EQ podcast, where we explore the power of and impact of inclusion across various industries and in this thing called life. I'm your host, Saul Gomez, and in today's episode, we're diving into a topic that's made waves across organizations and communities, all over, especially since 2020 following the George Floyd murder. This topic being a 3-letter word that's become somewhat taboo, DE&I. And to help us navigate this discussion, we're joined today by Julie Reitzi, a passionate DEI practitioner, HR professional with over 15 years of experience. She holds a bachelor's degree in American Studies and Psychology from the University of Texas, Austin, and currently serves as the Internal Relations Manager at Lone Star College. Prior to that, she worked as a HR and EO consultant. Julie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Saul. I'm really excited to be here. I'm grateful that you reached out.
No, we connected some time ago, and congratulations on your role and your newest accomplishment. Before we dive into the meat of our discussion, can you tell listeners a little bit about your background, some key moments or experiences that shaped your journey, and really what led you to become so passionate about the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So I was born and raised here in Houston, Texas, and I think growing up in Houston in particular has given me sort of a lens to, I would say, 1, intersectionality, and 2, the power of place, and how much that kind of shapes who we are, our experiences. So my parents both moved here to Houston, Texas for opportunities. So my mom from Monterrey, Mexico, and Nuevo León, so that's one of the northern states. She came here as a 16-year-old. My grandfather was a guest worker, so most of her childhood, he was here in the States working. And so she kind of grew up only really seeing him about once a year. So she was really excited to come join him and my grandmother here in the States when she graduated high school. So she actually did attend a year of high school here in the Houston area to kind of learn the language a little bit better, get a little more acclimated. And on my father's side, he is, I guess you could call him a first-generation American. So my grandparents immigrated to the United States, basically as, I would say, refugees of World War II. So my grandmother was from Croatia. My grandfather was from Hungary, and we are ethnically German on that side. And so he joined the military. My father was born in Fort Knox, Kentucky, but grew up in South Milwaukee. Just kind of a little bedroom community south of the bigger city of Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. And again, the power of place. I mean, it was so ethnically German there that my father didn't speak English until he went to school. He only knew German growing up, and most of the community spoke German. So I kind of joke that I'm a very Texan mixture. Texas has a lot of German influence as well as obviously a lot of Mexican influence. But growing up, it was just very, very multicultural. But I didn't think anything of it because that was just my normal. We have a lot of folks who move here to Houston for, the various industries we have here, oil and gas, healthcare. So I had friends from Venezuela, from Nigeria, from Mexico, from all over, a lot of Vietnamese immigrants here. And so I didn't really appreciate that as much until I moved to Austin for college and realized, oh, that's kind of a unique experience. Like even this city that is kind of being touted as so diverse wasn't even as diverse as where I came from. But I think, also kind of growing up between cultures just kind of made me sensitive to what can feel like to kind of be not in the center of belonging, so to speak. My mom, she had her reasons, but she didn't teach us Spanish growing up. And so that did cause kind of a separation between me and some of my family members, and also just, other Latinos here in Houston. And so I think those were, early influences that just kind of attuned me to the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, yeah, I think, when I went to college, I didn't quite have a plan. I just, I knew my family expected me to get an education. That was something that was really drilled into me. So kind of bounced around to different majors. I really thought I was going to be an English major. But then I started taking more classes that were kind of cross-listed with this thing called American Studies. And so I really kind of found my campus home there in a smaller major. And it was great because, in American Studies, you can study just about anything. It's kind of a multidisciplinary sort of field where sociology, political science, history, like all of it kind of gets mixed in. And so a lot of times that's still the lens that I find myself using. And I think that prompts me to ask probing questions and be curious about things versus make an immediate judgment. And so I think that has served me well in life and in my profession. So yeah, I would say that those are kind of some of my early influences.
Wow, that's quite a foundation. You've aside from your education, you've got quite a portfolio of life experience and, mixed in with your professional stuff, your experiences, and you have a background in cultural intelligence. You're a certified employee engagement specialist, a certified diversity professional, an adult mental health first aid instructor, and you're SPH, senior professional human resource certification, right? Man, that's awesome.
Thanks. I call it just being a nerd.
I'm kind of jealous. I'm trying to work my way there. I'd like to touch on just your educational journey, right? You mentioned earlier that, it was not a question, you were going to go to school. At any point, did you feel like, that sense of belonging, like maybe I should be doing something else? Or if not, like what kept you on that trajectory of like getting your education and then moving forward and what got you to where you're at now?
I had a lot of pressure from my parents. Some of that just kind of that, immigrant American dream kind of thing, right? Where it's like, we're going to place all our hopes on you for the prosperity of our family and our lineage and no pressure, right? And, I was grateful though that, they did encourage me to do my best and not settle for less, some people may critique my dad for this, but he wasn't happy with an A-. He wanted to see that A+. And so, they really did encourage me as far as, making good grades so that I could get into a good college and everything. But I really didn't know what was going to be next. Like I didn't go into college with any sort of real plan about, okay, what am I going to do to like make money after this? And so, I'm grateful that things worked out the way that they did. And I was able to, get an internship and turn that into a job and kind of, just build from there. But if I were to go back and talk to 17-year-old Julie, I would tell her to really think a little bit more about, what career trajectory, would be something that I'd be interested in. Not a lot of 17-year-olds think that way, right? But, now that I'm in the field of higher education, I see students who kind of do what I did, where they just take a bunch of classes and don't have a real path. And luckily for me, I had some scholarships, I had financial aid, I had a bunch of credits from taking some advanced placement classes and testing out. And so I was still able to graduate on time, even though I had really meandered. And, I had a wonderful advisor once I did get into a program, but early on, there's just so many students. It's almost like cattle call, like they're just there to get you enrolled in classes. They aren't as, attuned to helping you pick what will get you on a path.
Right. No pressure.
Right. No pressure.
And so it's almost like this chore, like it's instead of being inquisitive and curious about education, it's kind of like I have to, and it brings on this sense of stress, right? And I think stress is great. It's when it becomes distress that it becomes, and that gets taxing, and it impacts our ability to function, our cognitive function. And I think a lot of times that's missed, right? Even in beyond education, right? In the workforce, we don't know that person's story. We don't know what's going on underneath, right? Everybody sees the duck, in the pond. Nobody sees how much the legs are churning. And so I think taking that perspective and being able to be open-minded about it really lends to creating those inclusive environments.
Absolutely. Just being curious about people. That's
exactly
curiosity, whether you want to call it a value, a belief, but that's really fundamental to me is before we, pass any kind of judgment, did we extend some empathy and some curiosity, Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, right? Because it's really about empathizing with people and trying to, sometimes it's not even about fixing it, right? Sometimes it's just about coming, knee to knee, shoulder to shoulder, and just, okay, let's sulk. Okay, let's talk through it, and because we're not going to have all the answers. But when it's not done right, when we don't have that sense of belonging, when things aren't inclusive, and then there's these very reactionary things, right? Like, the George Floyd thing, there's a knee-jerk reaction, and this whole DEI thing just blew up, right? And you had DEI everywhere, all these commitments, and we've seen over the time where, good intentions, well intended, but just intent versus outcome, right? And now we're at where we're at, where DEI is almost became taboo, like a bad word. So, what are your perspectives in terms of that, and why DEI has gotten such a bad rap?
Well, I'm really glad that you took us back to 2020 because, this may be an unpopular opinion amongst DEI practitioners, but I do think that a lot of organizations responded to pressure and weren't quite ready to fully commit, fully engage with DEI in a way that would be sustainable and meaningful. I think that all of a sudden there's this flourishing of DEI jobs. There are people who felt really passionate about the subject, but maybe didn't have the organizational change skills or the background in just, leadership development, people management, human resource management. Not that it has to live within HR, but, really at its heart, when we're talking about DEI, we're talking about people, and there's a certain skill set that comes with that. That's not just, not just leading workshops, right? And so, I hate to say it, but I think that's part of how we ended up here is we've seen some organizations kind of set up a house of cards, essentially, right? Maybe they weren't structured in a way that was going to be conducive to success for that department. Maybe they were kind of sidelined and weren't really connected to like core business and kind of just over here on the side. And so if you're not really reaching people at the departmental level, you're not going to be successful. And I think, we'll probably talk about that a little bit more later, is like the different layers and levels at which this all operates. And so, I think some of the resistance is, I just don't want another thing to do, right? I think that there's some people who are like, yeah, in theory, that's great. I'm not racist. I don't discriminate against people, but I don't need to go sit in a training about it. I think that sometimes I've been in spaces, I'm not going to say this is everyone's approach, but I've been in spaces where sometimes there isn't a lot of grace extended to somebody who's in a learning kind of or beginning sort of stage of their journey. Again, a lot of this is about helping people navigate through a change that we're expecting of them, right? But if we have expectations of them we haven't scaffolded and haven't prepared them for, and we're, expecting them to all of a sudden have an expert level knowledge when they haven't had opportunities to learn in a safe kind of way, you're setting them up for failure. And so I've seen spaces where maybe somebody doesn't use the totally up-to-date terminology and they get shut down immediately for it and don't have an opportunity to really kind of, work through that in a way that isn't just public humiliation. And that's just not effective. That's not how you're going to get somebody to learn and change. So there's ways to do it in a way that's going to actually encourage people to grow and learn versus shut them down.
There's so much to unpack here, right? So when we talk about allyship, which is one of the areas where I feel the practice of DEI collectively, right, where I've seen it done wrong, is that grace isn't lent to them. And in the spirit of DE&I, one of them being inclusion, it's very exclusive.
Yeah.
Or the practitioner hyper focuses on a single demographic or all the minority demographics except for the majority. Mm-hmm. And so that's counterintuitive. And so why would someone want to partake or participate in something they're excluded from? Yeah. And, a real close friend of mine, he said, bro, as a white man, I try to be an ally, but then people tell me it's not your problem. I don't need your help. And so, and I think that's a loaded subject in of itself, but I think to your point, we need to be able to extend that grace to people that are trying to learn. And a lot of practitioners got it wrong because it's not about hyper focusing on one demographic. It's on focusing on the collective humanity of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I think, unfortunately, I think sometimes that's how like that politics of resentment can kind of start bubbling up, right? Yes. So, and just disclaimer, let me just put this out there. My views represent me and not my employer or anyone else, right? I do think that we live in a structurally unequal society, and that can be very hard for people to grapple with, to understand how they can affect change if they do feel compelled to, address that. I think, again, if we don't include everybody in the conversation, if we say, well, you're benefiting from this, so you don't get to be part of the conversation at all, then you start to see that politics of resentment.
And I'd also tell you that where a lot of DI programs fall short is they're not tied to the mission. You made a point about the DI practitioners kind of stashed somewhere off in the corner when they should arguably be a C-suite position. The DI, the chief diversity officer position should not be under HR, should not be under EEO, should not be under it should be either a special assistant, in this is Saul Gomez's opinion, right, or part of the C-suite as an advisor, kind of like the Office of General Counsel or something of that sort. Because there needs to be that autonomy to kind of go back and forth and have the authority to make decisions and influence at the leadership level. And so when that doesn't happen, the misconceptions get further exacerbated. And when, you get into organizations that pride themselves on being diverse, in a lot of my experience, they're very diverse at the lower levels. And the more higher you go, the more homogenous it is. And so it's very much, well, I did it, so should you, and work hard. Well, you're missing the context of where people are coming from. Not everybody started off with the same set of tools.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned something else in one of our talks. You mentioned two acronyms. It was the DEI was didn't earn it. And I forget what the MEI was. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that one's a little bit buzzy. So the MEI stands for merit, excellence, and what's the last one? Intelligence. And so I say buzzy because I think, Elon Musk has most notably kind of picked this up and is he's an anti-DEI, kind of advocate, I guess you could say. And I think where it really misses the mark, again, kind of what you're talking about, everyone having different tools at their disposal, I see this so much in the community college setting, right, where we have brilliant students who, they don't have the family background where they're going to elite private schools, right? And so they have a different kind of set of circumstances. And some of them still end up, transferring into elite colleges and universities, right? But it's different than being a legacy admission, right? And so it's really easy to talk about merit, excellence, and intelligence when your father owned emerald mines in South Africa, right? And so, one example I kind of thought of is, let's say you have two students who want to get into culinary school and are just incredible bakers, right? But one student, is basically working out of a rent apartment, tiny kitchen. Whereas the other student, their parents remodel their kitchen to get them, culinary grade, appliances and all those different things, right? If they both can produce an amazing cake, I'm honestly going to think it's more impressive that the student baking in the tiny apartment kitchen pulled that off, right?
We eat with our
And so, one thing I appreciate is, our chancellor has really been saying, like, what's elite is doing what we do, where we, take students wherever they're at and get them to where they want to go, versus just kind of being born into certain circles where that path, maybe you do work hard, of course, but that path is smoother for you. You've got the highway flyover versus the bumpy road with all the potholes. We're all a product of society and our environment. And, I think our culture is just so obsessed with individual achievement, and we have this illusion of meritocracy where it's like people don't want to acknowledge that they've gotten any help to where they are, to be where they are, rather. And I think we just need to have more honest conversations about that,
Looking to grow your business beyond 5 figures, 6 figures, 7 figures plus? What I want you to do is go download this book. The title is called Be Good, Be Brief, Be Gone. It will help you grow your business past 5, 6, and 7 figure. Go download the book today, growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash, and download the book for absolutely free.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, it's one of the things I retired from the military in 2020. And I purposely didn't want a government job right off the bat. I wanted to go into the private sector. So I did some consulting. And I just feel like one of the things that I really value so much about the military is the concept of team, right? It was never about me. It was about the team. It was about the mission. And it was funny when I was transitioning, some of the advice, and rightfully so, was, hey, stop talking about everything else and talk about what your accomplishments are. I did this, I did that, and that was just foreign to me. And so I've been trying to, reconcile the two, because I think there is something to be said about personal achievements, right? Whether it's personal or professional. But I think we also need to highlight the fact that we didn't get here alone. When we're talking about equity, right, and talking about opportunities, I always had an issue with affirmative action, because action, I think, was a temporary fix for a long-term issue that we continue to have. And I think rather than to fund those initiatives, fund the inner cities, fund the infrastructure, the education system, so that people do have the tools to compete at the collegiate level. But yeah, that's a whole matter.
That is a spicy topic, and I think there's so many different factors that go into it. And so, I would love to have a long, maybe part 2 conversation of this about college admissions, because I work for an open admissions institution, so our dynamic is very different. I mean, if you can pay for your classes, you can meet the application checklist, we take you. Just the climate we're in right now with information literacy. It was hard enough before generative AI really took off. And so we're just in this totally new era. The internet was a whole, novice content being able to be out there is a wonderful thing, but it also really muddies the water in terms of the information people have access to. And so it's just so much harder to really fact check. And I think the average person now, no matter their political inclinations, no matter what they're into, is just generally, just distrustful of information out there, because we know that, there's deep fake technology now. There's all this stuff on social media. I mean, it's very hard to combat things at the level of like what's factual and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that makes things challenging for practitioners. I won't lie, because that's often my first tool that I reach for is like, well, here's the research, And I do think that that's valid, but I think sometimes that's not the way that we lead, right? I think kind of going back to what I was talking about with being connected to the core business and the mission, I think, getting into some of the emotional intelligence, the cultural intelligence, just the practical skills people need to be able to compete in this global world, I think that can be a more compelling sort of argument as to how does this directly help me function in my job versus, highfalutin ideas of what's right and wrong, or, what this politician versus that politician says. I think people just really want to know, how does this benefit me?
And I think there's a well-premised and virtuous, concern there, right? How does this benefit me, or how does it hinder me, right? The opposite is how is this going to hurt me?
Right.
Because it's not, again, right? It's not about taking away from you to give to somebody else. It's about providing people what they need to be successful, whatever that is. You talk about EQ and CQ. EQ meaning emotional intelligence, and CQ meaning cultural intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
One, what are those for our listeners? And then how can they leverage that? How can those two be leveraged?
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to kind of try to differentiate them as best I can. So, cultural intelligence is definitely a distinct set of skills from emotional intelligence, although I would argue that they're related. With emotional intelligence, it's your ability to kind of extend empathy, understand other people's motivations, emotions, just, some of what we would call those soft skills, so to speak. Whereas cultural intelligence, I think, is a distinct set of skills that help us work effectively with people who are different than us. And so, we may have high levels of emotional intelligence, but maybe we don't have the cultural context and knowledge that we need to be effective. And so that's kind of where they can differ, because we can have the greatest intentions, feel like we're really reading somebody, but maybe we're missing the mark if we don't have that piece of being culturally attuned to that person and, their context.
Yes, it's about people, but it's also about the organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can have all the potlucks, we can have all the guest speakers, but unless it's tied to the mission, how do you measure success? What is the ROI? When we talk about data, right?
Right.
It's either got to help the organization make money or save money. What is the organization's corporate social responsibility?
Right.
And so how do you navigate, or how do you solve for, well, is it about people, or is it about the bottom line? Or can it be about both?
It's a yes and, really. I think if your people are unhappy, you're going to have a harder time being competitive. I think if you, are competing in a global market and you aren't prepared for that, you're going to have a hard time being competitive. I think, if you're not thinking about the employee experience and how do we get the best out of our people, again, at that macro and micro level, I think you're going to have a hard time being as competitive as your peers. Mm-hmm. I am guilty of mostly reading articles these days and not as many books, but, I love to read Harvard business, reviews. I like to, kind of keep up on some industry journals and stuff. And, Google is so big and prolific that they even put out some of their own research. And, the most effective teams have a sense of shared purpose and belonging. And so, we can act like it's all kind of, woo-woo, kind of soft stuff, but really it does come down to the bottom line. And, for your team to be able to perform at a high level, belonging is really important. I mean, we're social animals. It is hardwired in us to really thrive in conditions where we are socially connected with other human beings. We are so student driven at Lone Star College, and I think that really kind of guides all that we do. So almost everything is put through the lens of how does this benefit our students. And I'm excited to see that there are more institutions shifting to that idea of, you know, we don't fix people, right? Like, people don't need to be fixed, but sometimes people have barriers, sometimes people have challenges, extenuating circumstances. And so what are the things we can do to try to, like we're talking about, ease that path? We still have high expectations of people. There's still rigor, whether you're an employee or a student, you know, taking our classes. But what can we do to kind of remove the noise to make sure that you can be as successful as possible? And then it's really up to you, you know? And so I think that's a good approach is, you know, we're not handing anybody a degree or giving them a paycheck for nothing, but we're doing our best to make sure that, you know, people have the circumstances that are conducive to their success.
I always wonder, right? How can we take something like that and replicate it elsewhere?
Yeah.
And yeah, every you know, organization is going to be different, but I think the premise there is people driven, right? It's people centric, but then the measure, how do you measure success? I think that's how it sounds like, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, how you tie it to the mission of the school is, what is our attrition rate? How many people are graduating? How many people are getting jobs because of their experience in academia? I think there's always room for improvement. And even to the point of DEI, you know, by no means am I saying DEI is dead. It's hanging on by a thread, you know, but you know, and which is why I'm so premised on just focusing on inclusion first.
Yeah,
that's the way to kind of net everyone, right? Let's include everyone first to the conversation. Let's understand the soft skills, because we can't get to the hard skills, the technical aptitudes, the competencies until we get a hold of these soft skills, you know. And we talked about culture intelligence and emotional intelligence, and I also like talking about psychological safety, because
that's a huge piece.
Yes, it's a soft skill, but it translates into the bottom line. It translates into your market reach, and with a broader market reach, you increase your revenue. And so that's how you tie it to money, right? That's how you tie it to the bottom line. And at the end of the day, organizations are there to make money.
Yeah. Well, and you know, and going back to the psychological safety, I mean, it's very easy to draw that line to innovation. You know, I mean, employees who are ridiculed for an idea that might be kind of outside of the box, that company isn't going to be as innovative as its competitors, right? Whereas if anything is on the table at a certain stage of the project, we're willing to look at, you know, ideas from different, you know, sources or industries. You know, we're willing to, you know, hash it out. Then you have the room to really kind of move the needle, because, you know, you have that support that, you know, you're valued, you're safe, you're not going to be laughed at for coming up with something that's different, you know, or your unique way of thinking or approaching problems is going to be leveraged and appreciated versus just kind of sidelined, you know.
You know, what is the cost of not lending those spaces, right? Well, one, people are going to do just enough not to get fired. How can you really truly leverage the diversity that you have in your talent pool if people are just doing enough to get by to not get fired? And then what's the hidden cost of that, right? High turnover rate. How long did it take you to get that person trained up? And then how long is it going to take you to bring somebody else in? And if you're doing that every other year or however long, and then you have a high turnover rate, that's also costing you money.
Yeah, that churn. I mean, it's very expensive to bring talent on.
And where's the continuity, right? Because the tribal knowledge leaves with those folks too.
Exactly.
So I want to move into, like, you know, solutions, right? So practical tips for fostering inclusion. What can individuals do, right? What are the individual level actions that can be taken by people, whether they're minorities or not?
Yeah.
Whoever they are, what are individual level actions that they can take to try and mitigate and at least bolster inclusion?
we're talking at the individual level, I think everything really starts with self-awareness. So it's hard for you to understand somebody else's culture or context if you don't have any kind of real thoughtful engagement with your own and how that might shape the way you think, your habits. And so, that could be, some of the, like we were talking about some of those life experiences. It could be being just familiar with your work style, your leadership style, your communication style. And so that's the first step on the road to opening up that space where we can engage with each other and be honest about what our needs are in the workplace, what our needs are on a team. And so some of that doesn't even have anything to do directly with identities, right? It's more just how do we relate to other people? And then, I think this is where that emotional intelligence comes in. I think emotionally intelligent people are able to bend a little bit to other people's needs, right? They don't give up who they are, but they're able to adapt a little bit to somebody's style or somebody else's needs. And when it comes to the level of, first line supervisors, I think so many first line supervisors are kind of thrown in without a lot of preparation or training, and maybe they were a high performing individual contributor and then you put them into a totally different role with different expectations. But, don't get me started on how much we need to train first line managers, but
you just read my mind. I was just thinking about that when you're talking, because that takes it to the team and department level strategies, right?
Right.
One thing I see a lot, especially in my time doing consulting, is you'd get very highly competent people, right? Masters at what they do. And because you did so great, we're going to put you in a management or supervisory position. And they're horrible. They're either leaving the organization or getting fired because they weren't people to begin with, right? And it doesn't mean they shouldn't be. But if that's not their inclination, then let them be the best technician they can be. Not everyone either is cut out to be, or not everyone wants to be a manager or a leader or a supervisor.
Well, and some of the companies that are good at this have dual career tracks, right? Where you can move up a technical career track versus having to move up an administrative or managerial kind of career track to get advancement and, get more, complex projects, get more pay, get, more recognition, opportunities to, travel to conferences, all these different things. It doesn't have to be packaged into a managerial role. And so, I think kind of like we were saying, those first line managers who maybe were really great individual contributors, some of them could become great managers, but I think sometimes we don't always equip them with the tools they need to really successfully lead a team of people. And, just from my experience in consulting, a lot of that, in equal employment opportunity, affirmative action compliance, and hiring and recruitment. If you look at the data from the lawsuits that come up, most of it comes from hiring. And I would wager most of those are going to be frontline managers who just don't have a lot of training, right? And so, again, get me off my high horse. I could talk for a long time about that. But.
I think it's an interesting perspective, right? Because it's almost like if you don't go the management route, then your career's kind of idling, right? And right. I think, how do you create those how do you incentivize people that want to stay technicians to not feel forced or compelled to have to go to management to continue to further their careers? If they can be happy doing what they're doing, is it performance bonuses? Is it, you're talking about, maybe we don't send them to a conference, maybe we'll send them to a workshop where they can get an additional credential, right? If you have mechanics, send somebody to a diesel school, send the other person to a, F1 racing school, right? And just get them more immersed in their field.
Yeah.
And then the people that do want to go to management, send them to, executive courses, send them to, conferences, send them to all these places where they can learn strategy. And the people that want to stay tactical, let them stay tactical. Yeah. And I think it's creating those pathways, not only entry level, but also as people progress in their careers. If I don't want to be a manager, I just want to turn wrenches all day.
And be the best wrench turner there ever was,
Exactly. Why can't you have both? And I think you can in most cases. It's just I think to your point, right, being open to innovative ideas, and with that, there's going to be mistakes. And I think that's where psychological safety is key, is can I make a mistake and bounce back? Can my mistake be seen as an opportunity to capitalize, to grow, to learn?
Right.
You know, is my $10,000 mistake going to be a lesson learned and how we don't, you know, a $10,000 lesson that we all benefit from? Or it's the end of Saul's career and now nobody else is going to want to stick their necks out there because Saul got canned.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so from an organizational perspective, how do you see policies, procedures, and practices influencing or impacting the individual and team and department level strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, I think those need to be living things that aren't just static, right? The workplace changes. At our college, our students change. We don't have the same students we had in the 1970s, right? When we first started. And so you talked about being data informed versus data driven. I think that we need to continually monitor how those policies and practices are actually working out. You know, what are the outcomes that we're seeing? And I think, you know, I think one of the problems we got into in that kind of 2020 wave is, you know, a lot of statements and not a lot of action, right? And so, again, if we can be tied into the core business, if people are actually accountable for some sort of outcomes, even if it just starts with, you know, employee satisfaction or employee engagement, that's a good start, right? You know, if you have problem areas and they don't improve, somebody should be accountable for that. And I do think that is a DEI issue, right? And so I do think too that it does help though to have visible support from the C-suite. You know, if the organization doesn't have a C-suite DEI person, I think that does just automatically limit what they're able to do just operationally. You know, if they don't have access to that level of the organization, then, you know, you're asking to be invited in versus part of the conversation that really sets the strategy.
Man, I like what you just said. You said there's a difference between being invited in versus being part of the team, right?
Right.
And I think both are good, right? That you're being invited. But I think being part of the team, even that can be good or bad, but being part of the team means you're already included. Whereas being invited, I can invite you, give you a seat at the table and give you a talking piece. But if it's all for naught and it's just a paperweight, just a check in the box, right? And I say, yeah, thanks, Julie. Hey, Mark, what did you say? Yeah, I want to hear that more about that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, like maybe we don't get to you on the agenda, or, you know, maybe you're just there once a month versus in the weekly meetings, or
right. No, absolutely. And I think that's really key. And, you know, because you said, you know, they have all these policies, but there's no action, right? There's no teeth to them because either they don't make sense or they're not practical. And if they're not practical, adjust them to what is practical and then scale from that.
Right.
Don't make this promise and then you can't deliver. And
you got to know your people, you got to know your organization, absolutely. Right? You got to know, you know, again, at that low level to the high level, what's happening at your organization before you just go in guns a-blazing. And sometimes, you know, you have to really put yourself in the position of a listener before you can really go in and take any action to be effective.
Absolutely. And I was just getting ready to say, right, you've got to be able to be able to do that as a leader, as a manager, even as a supervisor. You have to be open-minded. You have to actually get to know people. Well, how do you do that? It's got to be intentional.
Yep.
And it's got to be deliberate, intentional. It's got to be authentic. I remember at one point in the military, right, I wanted to test the theory, right? I said, everyone I walked by, right, when I got to staff duty, it was weird to me that I would walk by down the hall and people would greet each other. Hey, how you doing? Great, great. How you doing? Great, great. That's awesome. Almost like just without even skipping a beat, right? They don't even stop. They don't even just pass by and it's just a quick blah, 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 right? You might as well just run, right?
Mechanical, you know?
Yeah. And so one day I walking by and they said, hey, how you doing, Chief? I said, not too good. Oh, that's great. Great. Awesome. Yep. Good to hear. Have a good one.
Like, whoa, wow. I didn't even pay attention.
You know, I can't tell you how many times I would ask, you know, sailors, Hey, how are you doing today? What does that mean? Let's go talk, right? What was that about, right? And then 3 hours later, I'm walking them to mental health, or I'm still sitting there with them, giving them a tissue, and all they needed was to be heard.
Yeah.
Anyway, my point is it's got to be intentional, right? It's got to be intentional, and it's got to be authentic. What would you say to leaders, managers, and just people that want to get a start on, like, how do I, and I want to kind of get away from the DEI piece, because again, I want to focus on inclusion. How do I become more inclusive, and what does all that mean? Where would you suggest people start?
Yeah, kind of like I mentioned before, I think the very, very first step before you really start anything else is just some self-reflection, right? Like, do a little self-inventory on, on where you're at. Do you have some sort of understanding of, what your own sort of assumptions are, right? Like, what is the water you swim in, right? What makes you feel like a fish out of water? When do you feel comfortable? And that is an exercise that helps you start to extend that empathy to other folks who may have different experiences than you, right? It's like, you really have to start, one mantra that I learned in my studies in college is nothing is normal, nothing is natural, right? But there's so much that we just take for granted about our own experience and center that. And when we're trying to be inclusive, we're trying to make space for as many of those experiences as possible. So if we're only centering our own, chances are we're not making a lot of space for others. And so I think that's really kind of the first step.
Well, that can be scary, right?
Yeah.
I think, we're creatures of habit. I'm not sure how much of that is natural or conditioning, maybe a little bit of both. And we like our comfort, right? But
yeah,
it's not until we're uncomfortable and get past it that we're able to grow.
Absolutely.
I can't appreciate the warmth unless I know what it's like to be cold. And so there's almost like this push-pull, this give and take. Any final thoughts? Anything else you can think of that you want our listeners to know or to take away?
I think again, it comes down to people, right? And so the field may be facing some backlash, it may be politicized right now, but I think there will always be value in finding ways that people can be their best selves in organizations. I don't think I even told you this, but I think one of my next steps in the next year to two kind of short-term future will be looking into a master's program in industrial organizational psychology. You mentioned one of your friends is an industrial psychologist. And so I think that may be a space where, we can strip away the jargon, we can kind of strip away some of the baggage and really get into, what's effective, what are strategies that work, how can we, again, give people the tools they need to be successful.
Absolutely. That kind of was going to ask you next. What projects do you have going on? I know you talked about, you can pursue your master's, but what other things do you have your hands in? Whether it's personal or professional, what books are you reading?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm a self-proclaimed nerd, so I'm always kind of doing something. So I'm working on a certification right now in career counseling and professional life coaching. And so there's definitely applications for that at the college. I've got some other trainings that I've just completed. So that mental health first aid certification you mentioned, I can now offer trainings in that. And so I'm really excited to bring that to the college. And, we're a huge organization. There's always going to be a need for folks who can just help connect people to professional help. And so that's something that I'm really passionate about. Doesn't quite fit neatly in my other experiences, but it's something that I really have a passion for. And so I'm even considering starting to pick up some consulting on the side, doing some trainings. So always busy.
Awesome. Great. Never bored, right?
Exactly.
What are you reading these days?
like I mentioned, I'm so guilty of mostly just reading articles and not books. But the last really good book that I read, you actually, talked a little bit about trauma and, generational trauma. And that was so on the nose with what I, was going to talk about is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I know it's 10 years old at this point, but man, that book really just opened my eyes a lot. I think anyone who is connected to people in some way in what you do should read it and really get some insight about just how much trauma affects us.
Well, when it's so universal, right? Because trauma isn't race or gender based.
Right.
It's a humanity thing. It's what makes us human. Well,
right.
Hopefully you don't have it, but trauma, but it's something we all have in common.
Yep, absolutely. And it's something that I think cutting edge organizations are going to figure out how do we kind of understand these experiences that people are bringing with them, and how do we deal with that? So yeah, that's one thing I've been thinking about.
Awesome. So what's a favorite quote that you can think of? Maybe you have a favorite. I don't have a favorite. It depends on circumstance. But what's one that sticks out of in your mind?
So we talked about the one that I really appreciated in school about just how nothing is normal. So just when you go in with that mindset of not taking anything for granted, you can really open up your curiosity, and I think by extension can really open up your empathy. Another quote I really like, I'm just, I'm big on accountability and responsibility, but, if not now, when, if not me, who, I'm probably butchering that one, but, that's something that I think a lot, when it may be easier to just not, walk that student over to their class and just tell them, vaguely directions, where to go. Just really taking ownership for whatever, sometimes even just cross your path and you didn't plan for.
Love it. Well, Julie, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. Folks, I hope you got as much out of this that I did. How can people get a hold of you? If they want to reach out to you and talk or just connect, what's the best way that people can get a hold of you?
So I'm not the biggest content creator in the world, but I would say LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me.
Okay.
So, when you post this all, you have my permission definitely to link my profile. But it's linkedin.com/in/Julie, my first name, -Reitzi, my last name.
Awesome. Good deal. Well, hey, again, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. Well, folks, that does it for this one. We've been talking with Julie Reitzi, and I hope, again, you got as much of this as I did. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Inclusivity EQ podcast. Until next time, stay open-minded, be curious, and continue to build your own Inclusivity EQ. I'm your host, Saul Gomez. Catch you on the flip side. Out here.
Hey, we all want to scale our business. Hey, I have the answer for you today to help you do that. If you're looking to scale from 5, 6, even 7 figures and beyond, book called Be Good, Be Brief, Be Gone. I'm going to give it to you for free. All you have to do is type in growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash, and you can download the book for absolutely free. I hope the book helps you this year. Take your business to the next level. Again, go grab the book, growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash. I wish you the best and grow, scale, and win.
Thanks for listening to the Inclusivity EQ podcast with Saul Gomez. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and we will see you on the next episode.
Magnum. Holy moly.
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for!
Dear God.